Just before we start our discussions, I would like to first invite the ICS Secretary General, Thomas Kazakos, who's currently in India, to say a few words. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, John, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to whoever is listening in and from wherever you're listening in. Thank you, as John said, for joining us at this very important webinar following the recent MEPC meeting at the IMO. We wanted to host this webinar straight after the IMO MEPC's meeting and Intersessional Working Group meetings to ensure that there was clear information available for our industry, especially to those who might not have followed the negotiations. As John said, the Net Zero Framework, which was being discussed at the IMO, are potentially the most consequential regulations that might have been put forward for the industry in recent times. As most of you will know by now, the decision was to delay the MEPC meeting, and thus the adoption of the Net Zero Framework has been put off for a year. This has left many in our sector with more questions than answers. MEPC did not provide the clear signal that the industry, stakeholders and fuel producers were hoping for, a signal that will help guide long-term investment, innovation and regulatory alignment in the global maritime transition. Today, we'll take the opportunity to unpack what was and wasn't decided at the extraordinary session of MEPC and the Intersessional Working Group, and explore what the implications are for ship owners, operators, and the wider maritime community. ICS has been involved in these discussions for nearly a decade and has put forward a number of proposals, and while not perfect, ICS had supported the adoption of the IMO's Net Zero Framework. The delay to any decision creates uncertainty, but despite these uncertainties, it's important to remember that the IMO remains the best and the most legitimate venue for setting global standards and ensuring a level playing field. Its role in guiding international shipping towards net zero remains vital, and continued engagement from all stakeholders is essential. I'm particularly grateful, as John already mentioned, to Reinhold Oftendal, the chair of the International Working Group, for being so brave to agree to join us to this webinar, and to my colleagues, of course, John and Simon. Before closing, I wish to express some personal thanks to everybody from our ICS team that has worked so hard on this, not just the webinar, but the whole process, and starting first, of course, with Simon, who has taken a lot of hit during all this time, supported, of course, by our advisor, Edward Hughes, John Stoffer and the Marine team, and of course, Stuart Neal and the communications team. And last but not least, John Adams and the whole ICS long-term measures working group that's been following in parallel. And closing, a big thank you to Fiona Watson of Avian for organizing this webinar. Looking forward to a constructive webinar today, one that helps us all better understand the next steps and how we can continue moving forward. Thank you, John, and over back to you.
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Okay, so let's get started. And I have a couple of questions of my own just to get us on our way. So perhaps a fundamental one, which I'll address to Sveinung and to Simon, and perhaps even in that order. So the question is, can you each give a short overview of what happened at the MEPC, which led to the decision to postpone? Sveinung, if you could take that first.
Okay, so where to start? First of all, we have been used to a process at the IMO where we have had discussion between member states and also observer organizations in the maritime sphere and in the wider political sphere, and it has been actually useful and meaningful way forward. We have been able to plan for it. And developing the strategy, developing the measures, etc. But now in October, we saw a different type of play coming in. We saw a high-level political involvement by some member states. We saw communication outside the building on where it was clear indications on what will happen if you did support and what will happen if you don't support, etc. So what happened in October was like a new dimension for the IMO, where geopolitics in a stronger flavor than previously entered into the building and affected the decision. So yes, the meeting was adjourned, but I've been there for 30 years and I haven't actually seen that type of discussions and play being a part of the decision making at the IMO.
Interesting, especially with your 30 years perspective there, Sveinung. And Simon, how did you see it? How did you things unfolding as to terms of what happened at MEPC?
Yeah, thank you, and good day to everyone. Although I don't have the great seniority of Sveinung, I've actually been going to IMO for about 30 years, and in that 30 years, I've never experienced a meeting quite like the recent MEPC. In summary, it was probably one of the most fraught and difficult IMO meetings that I've ever experienced. But that's really a reflection of the great importance of the issues and the strength of feeling behind the positions which governments decided to take. So on the one hand, it's fair to say that the usual famous IMO spirit of cooperation was not quite present in the way that it normally is at IMO meetings. But we also have to understand the something we probably underestimated, and that includes ICS, all of the supporters of the net zero framework, was just how strongly the United States felt about the net zero framework and the political capital that they would invest into trying to affect the final outcome. So I think actually we have to recognize that in the United States, the assiduousness of the tactics which they used to deliver from what their perspective was their objective. I think that actually was, from their perspective, is actually rather impressive what the Americans did, even if on the ICS side and many other member states, we're very disappointed by the outcome. I think Sveinung may have a different perspective, but and we may explore this later on. But I think the critical moment in the meeting was when the United States, with the support of governments such as Saudi Arabia, decided to introduce what's called the explicit amendment procedure. It sounds very arcane, and we may talk about it more in a moment. But
I think we will take that up, Simon, if we can. I just want to set the flavour for your immediate takeaways from it, and then we will circle back and dig into these a little bit, if that's okay. Yeah, but I think. Okay, I think that's great. Thank you. Because I want to nudge us forward a little bit as well as to where now we've got your takeaways of what happened. Maybe nudge forward a little bit and maybe as a lead in that direction, Sveinung, asking you the question to follow on from what you've just told us. What's your understanding of the process now at IMO in terms of what happens next? Can further changes be made to the current text in order to achieve a consensus? I suppose what I'm saying simply is, what can we do now? Is there anything we can do, or do we just sit on our hands for 12 months? How do you see that?
No, first of all, I think we should always believe in the future, and we are talking about the future, and it is always a limited level of certainty about the future, and actually we are all a part of shaping the future. So of course we can do something, and I have to say that over these 30 years, I think we have seen a great amount of achievements at the IMO, and also we have seen some setbacks. After the financial crisis, we can still remember it. It was, everybody said no more environmental requirements, and and then we recovered, and then of course we have then built further environmental requirements. So when it comes to the situation now and the IMO net zero framework and how to respond on climate change, I think the strategy is firm. Those who opposed the net zero framework didn't say that they reserve their position on the strategy, so meaning the political basis is there. And then when it comes to having in mind the views of some member states, and we have referred to those in our discussion, I think everybody is now thinking what is possible to achieve in this period and what need to be delayed. And I think to give a clear answer on that one, I think is a little bit too early. What was promising, though, is that still we adjourned the meeting, but we continued the discussions on the technical elements the week after. So it is not a complete shutdown on our activity on climate change. And I think then when we are coming to the next MEPC meeting, which will be April, and then also to the adjourned meeting, I think we will have a much clearer situation on what will be possible in this period, and I'm talking a kind of 2-3 year period, and what need to be then decided upon later on. Since we're talking about the future, you know, we all, I think, need to further digest and consult among each other to identify where is the room for possibilities in this short period, and what is the room for possibilities on the long term.
No, thanks for that, Svein. It's very interesting. I mean, just so and for the sake of the audience, make sure I fully understand part of your answer there. And it was part of a question I was thinking of for later on, but just to touch on it now. What you are also saying is that in the Intersessional Working Group last week, you were still able to do some meaningful work there, focusing on, and tell me if I'm not interpreting this correctly, but focusing on the technical elements, because that's a part of it that's unaffected by where we are at the moment, and that's still something you can work on. Briefly, is that correct?
That is correct, and all legal frameworks, they are supported by various types of guidelines. They can be technical in nature and also partly political. And a part of the discussion at the MEPC meeting was that some claim that we don't have full certainty of what is the implication of the net zero framework because we don't have the guidelines ready. And then, of course, coming to the Intersessional Working Group, actually it was accepted to work on the development of these guidelines, and that will be continued spring 26. And hopefully the committee also will allow further development of these guidelines. So the understanding and certainty about the framework as such, including the reward mechanism, which is a part of it, and including how you calculate precisely the GFI, can be allowed, so then we have a larger amount of certainty and we don't lose time on that one.
Great, thank you. That's very clear. You know, just thinking of it in terms of the answers that both Simon and Svein gave us about the how things unfolded on the final day of MEPC, I do hear words such as fraught and other sort of terms for it, but I'd like to bring you back in, Thomas, if I may, because what I'd like to refer to is a note that I was very interested to read from the ICS chairman, Emmanuel Grimaldi, and I won't read it all, of course, but just to paraphrase, he was saying, the outcome of a 1-year delay was not ideal for business confidence, and that during this intervening time, and at a time like this, we need cool heads and calm actions supported by a clear process. So, Thomas, with this in mind, how does the ICS intend to respond to what's happened?
Thank you, John. I think carry on with what Svein was saying before. ICS will continue to do what it actually does for more than 100 years, especially in such an important thing. What the chairman meant by that is that, yes, we have made it clear that we were not pleased with the outcome, but we need now to take it all in. And as Simon mentioned before, we need to take stock of what has happened and take into account the various objections and the political capital used for it. And part of this process is what we're doing today. This webinar, it was of course originally scheduled to advise our members as to what would be the outcome. This is what we're doing now. We are now trying to give some answers, and we're so grateful for Svein for being able to give us some, as much as he can at this stage, clear answers as to what is the options going forward, in order for us then subsequently with calm, cool heads to assess all this, see what's available for us in terms of options, and what's best for the industry for us to have an informed decision, as we usually do as ICS. And I think the message that ICS is putting out is that, yes, we're disappointed, but it's business as usual. We have to move forward, think positive, and remain committed to the original idea that we have supported all this time under the IMO guidance, which of course needs to clear out the processes and everything else that in order for us to move forward. So it's just a call for cool heads from our chairman. Is absolutely right. Yes, it's done, but we have to move forward. Shipping doesn't stop, and we'll continue to do so. So let's get properly informed, assess within our expertise, and then take our decisions going forward.
All right, thank you, Thomas. I'm going to take, there's a few questions coming in from the audience, which I'm very pleased to see. I'm going to try and, I'm not going to take them in any, the order I might take them in is where I feel it might fit with the stage we're at in the discussion. So there's a question here from the audience. Do you see any chance of the IMO net zero framework being adopted next year without reopening the, and it's in quotation marks, approved wording and making changes to it? I think that kind of follows on from what you were saying, Sveinung, as well. Did you get that question? Want me to repeat it? Or are you okay with that?
No, I'm fine with it.
Okay.
You know, first, I think the first occasion we will see what you know, the member state would like to do when it comes to a measure will actually be the spring meeting, MEPC 84, where you will have input on how do we then see the future when it comes to the measure. And the adjourned extraordinary session is then actually to actually decide upon the text, which is now finalized. The text is finalized. I think that was an achievement, to whether adopt it or not, or to put it on a hold for a moment. So that we do not know. I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it is then needed to have a dialogue also with those who oppose the regime to find in a decent way the pace we want to move forward. Simply because so far, you know, the strategy is there, and we need then to identify also their level of, can I call it acceptance, meaning how far is it possible for them to accept that the IMO is moving forward in the short period, and then, you know, when it comes to the battle, can I call it the battle we had at the MEPC, I think nobody wants to have that again. So we need to find a way, and also where we can put the organization together stronger. I think it is of utmost important that the safety committee is doing their work on the safety provisions on the fuels. I think it is of utmost important that we at the MEPC are working on the life cycle guidelines, because I think this is important in the industry as well. We have had so much comments on the carbon footprint of the various types of fuels, the LNG, the biofuels, the biodiesel, or the ammonia, or whatever, and also that we do our work on carbon capture and storage, so that we use this period to bring more clarity to the technologies and the fuels and everything which is needed in order to take the reductions we need to do. So I cannot give a more clear answer on that. Of course, I have my personal thinking. All of us have a personal thinking, but I think for me it is important to have the organizations and the member states and the observer organizations working better together again, and because we have done so, and we need to find back to that.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you very much. I'm just looking through the questions again from the audience, and starting to get some questions of some similarity, talking about next steps in the process, and the voting that took place before. I think I'm going to try and wrap all of these up into what I might call a procedural question. It sort of touched on something that that you had mentioned in your opening comments, Simon. So I might come back to you to open this up, and then go to Sveinung again. But and it's something I don't fully understand myself, to be honest. I would like to hear a little bit more on this. As you were touching on, you said that an important point in the MEPC meeting was when the United States and Saudi Arabia insisted on having a vote and what is known as the explicit acceptance procedure, as opposed, I guess, to the tacit acceptance. Can you explain what this means and why it might have more serious implications for IMO beyond the adoption of the net zero framework. So maybe the distinction between those two and the implications of using explicit acceptance procedures. You want to go at that first, Simon?
Yeah, I'll do my. So I'm not a lawyer, so that's sometimes an advantage because I can try and explain it in a form that I can understand. Okay. It's quite complicated.
Okay. I've noted your disclaimer, but you can go ahead now.
Yeah, thanks. No, so the starting point actually is the reason why IMO is such an effective organisation and has delivered this really impressive body of maritime regulation over the last 50 years. Is because of the ingenious introduction of what they call the tacit amendment procedure. So in simple terms, what that means is that, let's go back 50 years. 50 years, IMO developed the MARPOL Convention. The big issue at the time then was oil pollution from tankers 50 years ago. And what they found was that they needed to update the regulations really quickly because they needed to respond to political pressure for action and technical developments. So this procedure means that a regulation that's adopted under MARPOL or SOLAS, once it's been adopted at the IMO, member states in theory have, depending on the convention, but under MARPOL, 10 months where they tacitly accept the changes that have been made. So unless 50% of the world's fleet actually formally write to the IMO and say, we refuse to implement these amendments, that they're going to enter into force. And that always provides everybody with certainty, because in practice, everyone knew that the agreed entry into force date was when the amendments would take place. With the explicit amendment procedure, which is permitted under MARPOL, and the Americans, I said they were assiduous and they discovered this tactical device, that would mean that it would be the other way around. So 50% of the world's fleet, or the flag states covering 50% of tonnage, they would have to write into IMO to say that we formally accept that we support these amendments. It gets complicated, but as you know, and Sveining referred to this, and you've read this in the media, the United States used intense political pressure outside the organization to shape the viewpoints of many governments who were previously favorable towards the net zero framework. So and we know the influence they had over some of the open registers. So firstly, it makes it less likely that many of those open registers would probably be reluctant to say that they supported the net zero framework in its current form. So in effect, that would mean that the convention would not enter into force. And it's actually even more when you have a brand new convention, like recently we had the Ship Recycling Convention. And that was adopted, Sveining, remind me, was it 2009? But it
15th of May 2009, yes.
Oh, you got it on your head, yeah. But it was, of course, that only entered into force this year, but eventually it entered into force. This is different. If within that 10-month period, you haven't got sufficient explicit support, it's like a guillotine, and that's the end of the net zero framework. You'd have to go back to zero to start it again. And if you understood all that, what's really potentially of concern to many, and this is something we've still got to debate within ICS. So I don't want to exaggerate or underestimate it. But if the precedent is used of using the explicit amendment procedure in this way, in the future, that could have implications for the way in which IMO functions as an organisation. As our global regulator, because it could slow the whole process down for any future regulation that IMO needs to develop. And I'm exaggerating a bit, but we don't want IMO to end up like the World Trade Organization, which effectively is now moribund, and the organization exists, but it can no longer do its core functions anymore. And that's something we would very much want to avoid at IMO. So cut a long story short, that the Americans raised the ante very much by turning the debate not just about the net zero framework, but potentially about how IMO operates as a global regulator in the years ahead.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I need to bring you in on this one as well, Simon, because it is a nice IMO procedure that you're very much directly involved in. You agree with Simon's sort of broad outline of it, or succinctly how would you put it?
No, it is correctly described. We are all proud to say that the IMO is an effective organization. So simply all IMO conventions is structured in the same way, meaning when we have all types of amendments, which is happening actually all the time on safety and on environment, then it is this tacit amendment procedure. And even if it is only an appendix to a regulation or whatever, you need to go through an amendment procedure. So that has enabled the IMO to constantly update according to the needs of shipping and according to the needs of safety and environment, etc. Now, also to bring what is special here is both in the MARPOL Convention and the SOLAS Convention, the entry into force condition is the 50% of the tonnage. Now, that is, of course, is a deliberate meaning because you need to have the acceptance of those who actually are into shipping in order to have a convention to enter into force. But when it comes to the constant update, it will be quite difficult then, as Simon described, to have these various small and large amendments to enter into force. And also working on the government side, I can tell you that it is quite a burdensome process within governments to have a ratification coming through. You need to have it through the government, you need to go to the parliament, you need to all these things and thing, and it can take several years. So effectively, you will block any kind of development at the IMO on the technical regulation side. So, but you, of course, when you develop a new convention, and if you're going to amend the articles of the convention, as we did with the IMO convention as such, then of course you need to go through the explicit ratification. So this was, in order to try to have some control of the entry into force and blocking of this framework, and it was used in the negotiation as a kind of card in the whole thing. So yeah, I think it is important for the shipping industry. You fly your various flags when it comes to the ship owners, but I think all of you would like to have an effective organization on the various technical sides. And this is not only about MARPOL, this is not only about climate, it is about how we develop regulations at the IMO.
Okay, all right, okay, good. Okay, I think we've got a better sense of that. Just to perhaps change gears a little bit and a different approach to the questions. My understanding is that the ICS support for the net zero framework was predicated on having a single global greenhouse gas pricing measure with no double charging for the same emissions, because it was felt that the alternative would be more chaotic with a patchwork of overlapping regional and national greenhouse gas measures. Given where we are now, do you think that the EU ETS for shipping is now here to stay for the foreseeable future? And maybe more of a speculative part of that, do you think that a Chinese ETS might follow soon with others, for example, the UK or Africa that we're reading about? How do you see the landscape now? And maybe I'll let you continue with that, Sveinung.
Yeah, I think we should clear indications from the EU side that if this was to be adopted, they were prepared to revise their regulatory regime with the intent of harmonizing with the IMO. So that is what we need, and that is a good indication. And I think that is for all of us, which is into shipping, and needed a future way forward. Now, of course, with the EU regulations in force, I don't think we will see in the short term a willingness to do anything about that, because they cannot then now trust that we will have a global regulation. We all know that the UK is working on their things. And I think it's also interesting to read the 5-year plan coming from China, which is indicating where they want to go in their economy and society. They have an environment and climate pillar. And I think that will also encompass the various parts of the various sectors, including maritime. But what they will do, they decide. So the point is, this patchwork of regulations, we don't want it, we don't like it. And that was one of the important elements of the net zero framework. So again, it's difficult to predict. The future of the EU framework lies in Brussels. You know as much about it as I do, actually. But I think they will, keep it for the moment, and then they need to look into what the IMO is doing in the future in order for them to harmonize or amend it. So yeah, there we go.
Okay. Simon, how do you see that?
It's complicated, and again, to reiterate, we've not actually discussed this yet amongst the ICS membership, and we've yet to have a considered discussion about what's happened. However, picking up on your earlier question about what the process will be, even if we very much hope and we're optimistic that eventually there will be an agreement. However, we don't know for sure, but it's quite likely that actually it will take longer than 1 year to have this agreement in place. The amendments might need to be recirculated, so that's another 6 months, and it's quite possible. It's such a, I can't exaggerate enough, and Simon knows this, that this is probably the most politically complicated and technically complicated piece of legislation ever in IMO. So it's likely that there's going to be at least a year's delay, probably 2 years delay. So I think in all likelihood, I think we have to expect that the EU ETS is going to remain in place for the foreseeable future. And without getting into too much detail, owners will be very familiar with the ETS because they're in the process of surrendering their allowances for the first year. But at the moment, it's still a transitional phase. In 2 years' time, shipping will be paying the full rate for ships going to Europe will be paying the full rate. So politically, that's going to make it much more difficult for the EU to adjust, because if I can put it like this, the EU member states will have become dependent on the considerable revenue that they will be generating from the ETS. Nothing's for certain. We had amazing news today between President Trump and China, so it just shows how things can change. But I think we would have to. I think as an industry, we have to anticipate the EU ETS is here to stay, and we probably have to anticipate that, given this situation, China is more than likely to roll out its own ETS. They've already started doing this on an experimental basis in domestic cabotage trades, and I don't know, of course, but informally, my understanding is they're now giving serious consideration to speeding up with the China ETS. So, and that's something we're going to have to factor in how we approach as an industry what we want to see happen over the next 12 months, 18 months.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Simon, and thanks for expanding on the question. I think that somewhere in the middle of your comments there, something I'm very interested, and I'm sure everyone listening in is interested to know, is going back to one of the previous questions. What can we do in this intervening period whilst this is on hold for 1 year to hopefully, going back to one of your comments, not go to 2 years or beyond? Does it send us? So these are important things for us all to consider, that this takes us on a different part of the journey. There's a question come in from the audience, and it sort of ties back a little bit. Maybe I can put it to you, Sveinung. And it's saying, to what extent, given all the comments you've both made, in fact, with regards to the EU ETS, but the question is saying, to what extent were the EU's regional measures part of the discussion, and to what degree do you think they may have contributed to the failure to reach an agreement?
Okay, it's a very good question. Now, first on the core of the resistance of those who oppose the net zero framework was, I think the EU framework was not that relevant. I think it is much more related to what the President of the United States said at the UN General Assembly, because there is in the core of the let's say the policy United States would like to have, That is also indicating what their view on climate is. And we all see also how they are, let's say, now focusing in their energy sector, because this is so much related to the energy. And then I think for many other states, I think the signals from EU was very relevant, of course, especially for the Chinese and also from other kind of strong maritime countries, to actually have a clear signal from the EU that they were aiming for harmonization with the IMO. I think will still be an important signal in the follow-up discussion. So meaning that track is not, let's say, put off the table, because we need to have this mindset of the global regulatory regime, and the EU member states need to be a part of that, and they need to communicate if the global regulatory regime is doing the job when it comes to decarbonization. Why not enter into it, and why not then harmonize? Why not? So this was an element, but I don't think the outcome would have been different if the signal would have been even clearer, because the background for the opposition was so fundamentally based on other type of thinking. But I wouldn't like to say that if we look into then the long-term trend, I think everybody in shipping also should follow how the various economies in the world are rigging themselves in the energy market, because this is really about planning for the future when it comes to how you plan for the energy transition and energy market, because that is also the key for the transition of shipping. And some regions and countries are planning for a change and transition, and some are holding back on that one. I think there is much of the answer, actually, in the long term.
All right. And I think your comments already covered this one as well, Simon. So I think that's fine. I think we've got an answer on that. But you've both referred to the United States at various points here, and there's questions in from the audience. I'm going to try and collate some of this together. There's questions about, as I say, the US and the voting process. We've kind of touched on that. There's been comments on the US and Saudi Arabia for the explicit process. There's a question here of how much was the carbon tax an issue, and also questions here about the IMO having the right to affect tax and set penalties, so the sort of roles of the organization. So I'm going to bundle all of this together to even make it more complicated into a two-pronged question. Mm-hmm. Gathering all up together, and just I'd like to get your views on it, Sveinung and Simon, as to what's your understanding of the reason, so I can get it in your terms, for the very strong opposition of the United States to the IMO agreement being adopted, and do you think the supporters of the net zero framework underestimated the influence that the United States might bring to bear on member states? So to try and put it succinctly, what do you see was the reason for the strong opposition, and was it underestimated? Maybe you could continue with that, Sveinung.
Yeah, clearly, I think that there are two main reasons. One is the whole thinking about energy and climate change, which is, very different now in the United States compared to Europe, as one example. And the other thing is also when it comes to the phrase tax, and I think it's quite interesting. Some, of the green movement they want to call this a carbon tax, and those opposing it also would like to call it a carbon tax. So there they are linked in the term, but in the real term, it is not a carbon tax. It is an energy transition within shipping, where you have a flexibility mechanism, which is also introducing the possibility for shipping so you introduce carbon pricing, but it is not a tax. So meaning to be able to call it a tax, and to also identify that this would have an implication on all economies, and it would have an implication on the energy sector, is the real basis for the opposition, and it is the real basis also for the support, for the support and the opposition. Now, did we underestimate? I have to say that compared to the first Trump period, it was different. And of course, we expected, and we saw it already at the MEPC 83, that was opposition from the US, even though they were not present, and also for Saudi Arabia. So we expected that to continue. But I think most of us underestimate the scale of the efforts they took into it. And because we haven't seen that previously at IMO discussions. So it was also in the public space. It was a kind of heavy effort on all levels and even on the highest level, meaning that was not, properly seen. And the question is then, is it anything we could have done about it? I think, we can all do better when you look back, but I think it was impossible to have, those who oppose this would still have done the same thing. And then the question is, would those supporting it had the same tools in order to stop that? And also for those who were then forced to abstain or to be silent or whatever, would they have found a safe haven among the supporters or not? That is the big question. So if a country is then experiencing pressure by some, you need to oppose, you need to be silent. Well, if you don't want to, can you find a safe haven in some other countries? That is a big political question. So I leave it at that.
No, that's interesting. Interesting. I mean, it's a lot of takeaways from that, which I'm sure we're all mulling over. But it's just this thing of you saying, well, it's not a carbon tax, but there's a loud voice saying it is a carbon tax. So to use the phrase perception being reality, it depends how you're interpreting it, I guess. And the other key thing when you're describing this, even to be using words like finding a safe haven, tells you much about the need for one, tells you much about how things unfolded. Did you want to come in, Thomas, or did I miss it?
I just, because I'm listening and learning. Early in my career, I met an admiral sitting on a double L mission, listen and learning, and it's very good. And I think I think our members will be more interested to hear not what has happened as such, we've covered that, and I think what's available going forward. And I think Svein said that at the beginning, I'm sure there are a few minutes remaining, I'm sure he'll be given a chance to remind us what is there for the industry, and of course through IMO. And I think that is the question we need to address for us to sit down with clear heads, as we said at the beginning, and decide what's possible, what's feasible, both politically as well as procedurally. But carry on. It's I'm enjoying it. I hope members do as well.
Yeah. Well, I hope everybody else is.
Just briefly, if I may.
I was going to come to you, Simon, to say, because you had made your earlier comments about the United States and the opposition, and the question was also talking about underestimation. But I wanted you to come back in on that. But if you could be quite succinct, because I have a couple of questions from the audience and that I want to cover. Go ahead.
Yeah, succinct. The first thing is, and we did underestimate the strength of feeling of the US, but you have to understand from their perspective, we thought it was all part of the transactional game, and they were using this as a pawn in their wider geopolitical objectives. But actually, for them, it was a matter of principle. And from the US perspective, doesn't matter whether you call it a tax or a levy, the US cannot accept the concept that private entities pay into a United Nations fund. And I think it's important that we digest that and thinking how we go forward. Being positive though, I'm also convinced that the United States, Saudi Arabia, all of those governments that oppose the NZF, they fully understand the value of IMO, and they want IMO to succeed. And regardless of their views about the wider UN system, they understand that IMO is a special place for regulating shipping. And I think that gives us potential optimism for there being some kind of agreement in the future.
Can I come in?
Simon. Yes,
John,
Simon.
can I come in? Yeah, because to follow up on what Simon said, and also Thomas. First of all, I hope you understand that in my role, I need to, and I really want to work with all member states, and as well as the industry, and meaning including if I continue in this role, which I very like to do, is also a cause I will be very happy to work with the US and work with Saudi Arabia, to work with all, you know, players in this game. Of course, I would like to do that and to find a way to how we can come together and find a solution. And when it comes to the industry, I think there are various parts of this. And I think you have done so much already in order to provide us with the answer, because the real thing, you know, the answer, what is possible, that is what I would like to say. Because the real thing is, what is shipping? It is to serve the global economy, to serve world trade. You will continue to do that, and you are capable of doing it. You will do it as it is now, and you will also do it in a low carbon future. And you know, you will do it. I'm sure you have demonstrated it all these various periods. You have done it, and you will continue to do it. Now, in addition, now we're discussing regulations. You will need it as an industry, predictable framework, so you can plan and you can time your investment properly, and you can choose your options, technology and energy-wise, etc., etc. So you need that. But I hope we really don't stop doing the investigations and testing of the new solutions, and work with your partners to give us the information, because we as regulator, we need the information coming from you, the industry. You are sitting at on a daily basis, and I think that is a so important contribution to our work. So we understand that shipping, not only today, but in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years, can continue to serve world trade. That is your job, that is what you do. And we need the information coming from you also in these times, on what's possible.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, as I would say, changing gears a little bit. There's a question coming in from the audience. There's a question here I'm looking at, which I'm going to read out, but I'm going to try and dovetail it with how I'd like you to respond to it. But the question, just in fairness to the writer here, I'll read out in its entirety, saying, in the wake of the outcome of the MEPC extraordinary session, do you think that proven technologies such as LNG, methanol, onboard carbon capture will be more attractive investments for ship owners rather than ammonia and hydrogen? I think it's very difficult for you to answer that part of it, but what I want to try and dovetail this into, and it's something that it was a question of mine here, really, that thinking a lot about the ship owners, and that and many of the ship owners who, and I've said this many times, are perhaps not as closely involved in these detailed negotiations, and have been concerned by the complexity and the proposed regulations and the high cost of compliance. And many of these ship owners have invested a great deal in the use of LNG fuels. And you know, something I know about a little bit about personally is that given the huge investment in the global LNG bunkering infrastructure, is this something now that can be addressed in this time when we have to prepare for what the next steps will be? Is this an area where we can be more flexible, and as well as LNG, bringing back into the question that I read about methanol and onboard carbon capture? Do you think this is something that could be dealt with more flexibly, or in a different way to resolve that going forward, given, if nothing else, the delay for a year has given us pause to perhaps reconsider all of that? How do you see that finding, if I can start with you?
First of all, I think, you know, I can start with this technology and energy neutral phrase, etc., etc. So I think when it comes to the regulatory framework, which it doesn't specifically mention any type of energy, any type, you know, it just has a reference value, and then you improve for that. But looking into the design of the whole thing, I think there is room for a large amount of flexibility. So meaning, if you have now invested and have a ship running on LNG, you should not be worried. I think it will be still a long period with that will be actually a beneficial and good, and also looking into the flexibility of the system, I think you will be fine for quite a long time. And then, of course, what is in our plan is in the LCA framework, look into the actual value, so that process will continue also on the LNG. We had also on the table the issue of, if you have LNG as cargo, well, how will you then calculate the LNG footprint when you use it as fuels? So meaning, this is not over, we will continue. And I think no member state, because you know, we are regulators, but we also have participation from the industry, is there just to punish shipping. We try to assist you, and we will of course look into what is the existing investments, what is in the existing fleet, and what is needed in order to reduce these emissions. So, you know, I can understand the concerns because a company is responding to its shareholders, and that is the, of course, very important. So if you have then a strategy already there, this was your plan, what will happen now? But I think bring everything on the table, you know, bring it to the IMO and look into how we can be there to assist you. We are working on carbon capture and storage. We are working in to have the sustainability criteria for the fuels, and we're also working on to solve the LNG issue in a better way. So the point is, we are not there to punish anybody. We are, well, you know, if you continue to the old area of high carbon emission, I think that is not the future. But for those who have solutions and strategies, I think we will look into how this can be best accommodated in the regulatory framework. Yeah.
Okay, Simon, any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, we have to be optimistic, and I think that there is a possibility to fix some of the concerns that have been raised. And of course, we now have the benefit of hindsight. Before I say what I'm about to say, of course, ICS took the position that we wanted to see the adoption of the agreement at this session, because it was we thought at that point 2 weeks ago, this was the only deal on the table, and despite our concerns about it, the huge complexity and the costs of compliance, it was better than the alternative of piecemeal regulation. But now that we have this pause, and we have to have a discussion and reflection in ICS, and your working group, John, will be looking at this, starting to think about this in the next few weeks, there is perhaps an opportunity to revisit the way that the GFI calculations and the whole approach actually to the let's be clear, very stringent GFI reductions that were going to be required in order to generate funds for the IMO. So we've got to do our own homework on this. It's extremely, as I said, it's both technically complicated and politically complicated, but I'm sure where there's a will, there's a way.
All right, thank you. Now we're moving into like the last 5 minutes here, so I'm now having a dilemma which questions to open up and maybe not finish. So I think that there's a question which was phrased here from the audience as a supplementary question. When do you expect the LCA guidelines that include biofuels, LNG to be revised, finalized? I think I'll just take that as answered in the sense of the flexibility answers that we've heard here, and just to let the writer know we've covered that one. I won't cover some of the remaining questions. There's a common theme to them, but I think we've covered some of these through the discussion so far. But I'd like to make my final question, and it's about the United States, just to make sure I have hammered it into the ground. But and it occurs to me, because it is the United States, maybe giving my age away, but it's something that we used to call the $64,000 question, but it's now a multi-billion-dollar question, I think, and it's this. And I'm going to put it to you, Sveinung, and to you, Simon, but you have to be quick. It's I know it's a big question. And also to refer back to something from the audience about the change of administration in the United States, and it's not for another 2.5 years or whatever. But my question is, do you think the United States might change its position? Or perhaps more realistically, what might be necessary to achieve an agreement with the United States? But I can only give you both about a minute and a half on that. Sveinung, what do you think?
First of all, I don't know. The answer is simply within the US administration. I cannot know, let's say, how they operate when it comes to the development of their policies. So I don't know. The only thing I would say, you know, in these 30 years, I have been working with the US under many presidents, both from the Republican Party and from the Democratic Party. And it has gone quite fine, actually. Also, we had a constructive cooperation in the first Trump period. And, you know, in my naivety, I also hope that that can continue in some way or another. Now we, of course, have had some sort of a new experience, which we, you know, I wouldn't call it the kind of it's not a shock, but it's a new experience for us, and we need just to find back together. And my door is open for the US delegations to have a dialogue with them. And when it comes to how they will develop their policies, only they know. I cannot say.
All right. I think that's fair enough.
Boring answer. Boring answer.
Simon, 1 minute.
We always have to be optimistic. Just to reiterate, the Americans do feel very strongly about some of the economic elements that were on the table 2 weeks ago. And we still have to evaluate this within ICS and amongst the ICS member national associations. But we also do need to bear in mind, actually, that the previous administration, the Democrat administration, although they were very supportive of the efforts to address climate change, and they hadn't withdrawn, they rejoined the UNFCCC. Simon will recall that the US were quite strong on having serious questions about the concept of an IMO fund. So we're going to have to, in the industry, we're going to have to work through these issues, and we're going to have to talk to all of the governments to see where they sit on this. But I'm optimistic that eventually we can get a deal at IMO, with the leadership of Anders Feynman, of course, as well.
Okay, thank you for that, Simon. Thanks to both of you for your answer to that question, which is still the one I think is in front of all of our minds. Thomas, I'm going to turn to you for any final comments.
Well, first of all, let me just say thanks to both the main speakers and me, the learner here. But what I take away from me on a personal level, it's Simon, of course, on my team, so we discuss regularly. But with finally, I think it's good for us to hear that I got with me the words flexibility. We were able to use the time wisely. IMO, through his words, is open to all governments, not just the ones that passionately opposed the agreement as it was proposed. So I think I'm going to go back to our chairman's statement that you've asked me at the beginning. Cool head, let's use the time very wisely now. Whether it was a shock or not, it doesn't matter. Let's move forward. Let's see positively and use it constructively, so we don't have to come to face this again. And I'm glad to hear that IMO is now a bit more wiser, if I may use the word, although 30 years gives you, we are all in the 30-year period of dealing with IMO within this group. So I think that I would like to say that if I was a member listening in, I'll say it's some light at the end of the tunnel, but with constructive and positive thinking, as Simon just described before, John.
Okay, thank you very much. We are out of time. I'd just like to thank everyone for a great discussion. Plenty for us to consider. So to our distinguished panelists, thank you for your engagement, and thank you very much to the audience for your active participation. I've tried to cover as many questions as possible and keep it within the flow of the discussion, so I hope that that's appreciated. My only final comment is that we are yet again at the beginning of a new chapter, and it's one that's going to bring with it challenges. But I still believe that these are challenges to relish, and challenges which we in the shipping industry will resolve, as we always do. And I look forward to that. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much again to the panelists and to everyone online. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.